Jeffrey Graney was 34, years old when his wife became CEO of the company they'd built together. The first thing she did was hand him the divorce papers across their kitchen table, treating him like a stranger she couldn't wait to forget. "Sign these," Jennifer said, her voice cold and clinical. It was the same voice that used to whisper loving words in the dark, now repurposed for terminating an underperforming employee. "My attorney says we can have this done in 60 days if you don't fight it." Jeffrey looked down at the documents, his hands trembling slightly. 15 years of marriage reduced to legal terminology and asset divisions. Outside their downtown Seattle penthouse, the city lights blurred through the November rain, and he felt something shift inside him. Not sadness, not anymore, but something else entirely. 60 days, he repeated slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't make this difficult, Jeffrey." Jennifer didn't even look up from her phone. Her freshly manicured nails, paid for with money from the company they'd built together, tapped against the screen with sharp, impatient clicks. "You'll get what's fair. The house in Bellevue, some savings. You should be grateful." What Jennifer didn't know, what she was about to discover in the most painful way possible, was that Jeffrey wasn't the nobody she had convinced herself he was, and in exactly 60 days, her entire world would collapse in front of everyone who mattered. But that revelation was still weeks away. For now, Jeffrey sat in their kitchen, watching the woman he'd loved for 15 years treat their marriage like a corporate merger gone bad. The granite countertops gleamed under the recessed lighting, and the silence between them felt heavy enough to suffocate. "Why now?" Jeffrey finally asked, setting the papers down. His voice was steady, but his heart hammered against his ribs. "Why wait until you became CEO?" Jennifer's eyes flicked up, cold and distant. "Because I don't need you anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke, sharp, cutting, final. She continued, her tone matter-of-fact, as if explaining a business decision to a boardroom. "Let's be honest, Jeffrey. You were helpful when we were starting out. Your technical skills got us through those early years. But Cloud Tech Solutions has grown beyond that now. Beyond you. I'm running a $50 million company, and I need a partner who matches that level. Someone sophisticated, someone who understands the world I'm operating in now." Jeffrey felt his stomach drop. He'd suspected something was wrong for months. The late nights that turned into Jennifer not coming home at all. The cold distance that had settled between them like frost. The way she'd started looking at him with something close to contempt, but hearing it said so plainly, so cruelly, felt like a punch he hadn't braced for. "Someone like Brian Montgomery?" Jeffrey asked quietly. Jennifer's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. "Brian is a colleague, the CFO, that's all. A colleague who's been sleeping in our guest house for the past 3 months while I've been traveling, for those critical client meetings. You kept sending me on?" Jennifer's mask cracked just slightly. Her jaw tightened. "Don't be dramatic, and don't pretend you didn't know this was coming. We've been strangers for over a year." She stood up, smoothing down her designer suit, Armani. Jeffrey noted, purchased during her last trip to New York, a trip she'd taken alone. "Sign the papers, Jeffrey. Move on, find someone at your level. This is better for both of us. At his level." The phrase stung more than Jeffrey wanted to admit. Jeffrey watched Jennifer walk out of the kitchen, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with sharp, dismissive finality. The sound echoed through the penthouse until the bedroom door closed behind her. And then there was only silence. He looked back down at the divorce papers. The settlement terms were outlined in cold, precise legal language. Jennifer would keep Cloud Tech Solutions, the company they'd founded, together in their cramped studio apartment 12 years ago. The company Jeffrey had coded, the entire original platform for working 18-hour days while Jennifer handled sales and business development. The company that now employed 200 people and generated enough revenue to make them both wealthy. Jennifer would keep the company. Jeffrey would get the house in Bellevue, worth maybe $800,000, and a settlement of $2 million. On paper, it seemed generous. In reality, it was less than 15% of what Cloud Tech was worth, less than a fraction of what Jeffrey had helped build. But that wasn't what made Jeffrey's hands shake as he read through the paperwork. What made his pulse quicken was a clause buried in Section 12, Subsection 4, a non-compete agreement that would prevent Jeffrey from working in the cloud computing industry for 5 years. Jennifer's attorney had crafted it carefully, using language that seemed reasonable on the surface, but would effectively destroy Jeffrey's career. She wasn't just leaving him. She was making sure he couldn't rebuild. Jeffrey set the papers down and walked to the window. Seattle stretched out below him, a maze of lights and rain-slicked streets. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, coming home to partners who loved them, building futures together instead of tearing them apart. His phone buzzed. A text from his sister, Claire. "How did it go? Did you tell her?" Jeffrey stared at the message, then typed back, "Not yet. Soon." What Jennifer didn't know, what nobody except Claire and Jeffrey's attorney knew, was that Jeffrey wasn't just the technical co-founder of Cloud Tech Solutions. He was the majority shareholder. When they'd incorporated the company 11 years ago, Jeffrey had put up 80% of the initial capital, money from an inheritance after his father passed away. Jennifer had contributed 20% from her savings. The ownership split had been 75 to 25 in Jeffrey's favor. Simple math, fair division based on investment and risk. But 3 years ago, when cloud tech was starting to scale rapidly, Jennifer had convinced Jeffrey to restructure. She'd argued that having a clear CEO with majority control would make investors more confident. She'd shown him projections, introduced him to advisors who backed her claims, and slowly, systematically convinced him that for the good of the company, they needed to simplify the ownership structure. Jeffrey had trusted her, had loved her, had signed the paperwork she'd put in front of him without reading every detail. Or at least that's what Jennifer thought. What Jeffrey had actually done was hire his own attorney, quietly, discreetly, who'd reviewed every document before Jeffrey signed anything. And what that attorney had discovered was fascinating. The restructuring Jennifer had proposed would have transferred majority control. To her, yes, but it also included clauses that were potentially illegal, buried in the fine print where she'd assumed Jeffrey wouldn't look. Jeffrey hadn't signed those documents. Instead, he'd signed modified versions that his attorney had prepared, keeping his majority stake while appearing to go along with Jennifer's plan. The paperwork had looked identical on the surface, same format, same general terms, but the key clauses, the ones that mattered, had been changed. Jennifer had never noticed. She'd been too confident, too sure of Jeffrey's blind trust, too convinced that the quiet, introverted tech guy she'd married would never think to protect himself. For 3 years, Jennifer had been running Cloud Tech Solutions, believing she owned 51% of the company. In reality, Jeffrey still owned 57%. He was the majority shareholder. He had voting control. And he'd been quietly documenting everything. Every decision Jennifer had made without proper board approval. Every expense she'd charged to the company that was actually personal. Every corner she'd cut. Every violation of their corporate bylaws. Jeffrey had it all, organized in encrypted files that Jennifer didn't even know existed. And now she wanted a divorce. Jeffrey's phone buzzed again. Another text from Claire. "Remember what Dad always said? Don't get mad, get smart." Jeffrey smiled slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. His father had been a corporate attorney for 35 years before he passed. He'd taught Jeffrey, early on, that the most powerful weapon in any negotiation wasn't anger or force. It was information, preparation, patience. Let them think they've won, his father used to say. Then show them the cards they didn't know you were holding. Jeffrey had been holding his cards for 3 years now. It was almost time to play them, but not yet. Not until the moment was perfect. He looked back at the divorce papers on the table. Jennifer wanted 60 days. Fine. He'd give her 60 days. He'd sign the papers, play the role of the defeated husband accepting his fate. He'd let her and Brian Montgomery celebrate their victory. Let them make plans for the future they thought they were building together. And then on day 61, he'd destroy everything they'd built on lies. The next morning, Jeffrey found Jennifer in the home office, already on her 3rd conference call of the day. She barely glanced up when he entered, just held up one finger in that universal gesture that meant, "Wait, I'm busy." Jeffrey waited. He'd gotten good at waiting. When Jennifer finally ended the call, she spun her chair to face him, her expression impatient. "What is it?" I have back-to-back meetings all day. I'll sign the papers, Jeffrey said simply. Jennifer's eyebrows raised slightly. Just like that? Just like that. Jeffrey kept his voice neutral, defeated even. You're right. We've been over for a while. No point dragging this out. Something flickered across Jennifer's face. Relief, Jeffrey thought. Maybe disappointment that he wasn't going to fight. Maybe both. People were complicated, even cruel ones. That's very mature of you, Jeffrey, Jennifer said, her tone softening just slightly. I know this isn't easy. I just have one request, Jeffrey continued. I'd like to stay involved with cloud tech until the divorce is final. Not in operations, he added quickly, seeing Jennifer's expression harden. Just as an advisor. It would look better for both of us if there wasn't a sudden dramatic split. Industry people will talk. Jennifer considered this, her fingers drumming against the desk. Jeffrey could see her calculating angles, weighing appearances against convenience. Fine, she finally said. You can keep your advisor title and stock options until the divorce is finalized. But you're not making any decisions. You're not attending board meetings. You're essentially a figurehead. Understood, Jeffrey said. Thank you. Jennifer nodded, already turning back to her computer. The conversation was over. Jeffrey was dismissed. As he left the office, Jeffrey allowed himself a small smile. Jennifer had just agreed to let him remain, officially connected to the company, for 2 more months, which meant he had full legal standing to access all company records, attend any meeting he wanted, and exercise any rights that came with his position. She had no idea what she had just handed him. That evening, Jeffrey had dinner with Claire at a small restaurant in Capitol Hill. His sister was 2 years younger, a corporate attorney who'd inherited their father's sharp mind and sharper instincts. So she actually fell for it? Claire asked, cutting into her salmon. She thinks you're just going to roll over? She thinks I'm weak, Jeffrey said. She's thought that for years. Maybe she's always thought it, Claire said quietly. No, Jen, Claire's expression softened. You know that's not true. You built that company from nothing. The entire platform runs on code you wrote. And she built the business side, Jeffrey said. She's not wrong about that. He took a sip of his wine, looking out the window at the rain. I was never the salesperson, never the networker. Jennifer has always been better at that world. Being good at selling doesn't give her the right to steal. Everything you built together. No, Jeffrey agreed. It doesn't. Claire leaned forward, lowering her voice even though the restaurant was nearly empty. Do you have everything you need? Jeffrey nodded. Financial records going back 3 years. Documentation of every decision she made without board approval. Emails proving she knew about the non-compete clause in the divorce settlement, and specifically designed it to destroy my career. He paused. And proof that she's been funneling company money to Brian Montgomery through fake consulting contracts. Claire's eyes widened. Embezzlement. Technically, yes. About $400,000 over 18 months. Brian's consulting firm doesn't actually do any work. It's just a way for Jennifer to pay him using company funds. Jesus, Jeffrey. That's not just unethical. That's criminal. I know. Jeffrey's voice was quiet. I didn't want to believe it at first. Kept thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation. But the evidence is clear. They sat in silence for a moment. Rain drummed against the windows, and somewhere in the kitchen dishes clattered. What's your endgame here? Claire finally asked. What do you actually want? Jeffrey had been asking himself that question for weeks. The truth was complicated. Part of him still loved Jennifer, or at least loved the woman she used to be. The woman who'd believed in their dream when they were working out of that tiny apartment, living on ramen and hope. The woman who'd stayed up with him during those endless coding sessions, bringing him coffee and telling him he was brilliant. But that woman was gone. Maybe she'd never really existed. Maybe Jeffrey had just seen what he wanted to see. So I want cloud tech, Jeffrey said finally. I want full control of the company I built. I want Jennifer and Brian gone, and I want everyone who watched her treat me like I was worthless to know the truth. Claire studied her brother's face. This is going to be ugly, Jeff. I know. Jennifer won't go quietly. She'll fight. She'll make accusations. She'll try to destroy your reputation. Let her try. Jeffrey's voice was steady. I have the truth. I have the documentation. And I have something she doesn't. What's that? Jeffrey smiled, though his eyes remained cold. Patience. Over the next 3 weeks, Jeffrey played his role perfectly. He was the quiet, defeated husband, accepting his fate with dignity. He attended a few cloud tech meetings as requested, sitting silently in the back, offering no opinions. He started packing up his things from the penthouse, moving them slowly to the Bellevue house that would soon be his alone. Jennifer and Brian grew bolder. Jeffrey would catch them exchanging looks across conference tables, little smiles that said they'd gotten away with something. Once he came home early and heard them laughing in the guest house. Brian's laugh was deep and confident. Jennifer's was bright, with the kind of joy she hadn't shown Jeffrey in years. It hurt. Jeffrey wouldn't pretend it didn't. But the hurt was fuel now, driving him forward. His attorney, David Lowe, no relation, though they joked about it, had everything ready. The paperwork was prepared. The evidence was organized. All they needed was the right moment. That moment came on a Friday afternoon in mid-December, exactly 45 days after Jennifer had handed Jeffrey the divorce papers. Cloud Tech Solutions was hosting its annual board meeting and holiday party. It was a big event, held at an upscale hotel downtown, with board members, major investors, key employees, and various industry partners all in attendance. Jennifer had spent weeks planning it, determined to make her first board meeting as CEO a triumph. Jeffrey received his invitation like everyone else. Jennifer probably assumed he wouldn't come, that he'd stay home and avoid the awkwardness. But Jeffrey had RSVP'd, yes, and he showed up in his best suit, looking calm and composed. The hotel ballroom was decorated with winter lights and subtle cloud tech branding. A bar in the corner served expensive wine. Servers circulated with hors d'oeuvres. Everyone who mattered in Seattle's tech scene seemed to be there. Jennifer stood near the center of the room, wearing a stunning red dress, holding court with Brian Montgomery at her side. She looked powerful, confident, successful. She saw Jeffrey enter, and her expression flickered, surprise, then irritation. But she was too professional to make a scene. She simply turned back to her conversation, dismissing his presence. Jeffrey found Claire near the bar. His sister was there as his attorney. Perfectly legitimate for the company's majority shareholder to have legal representation at a board meeting. Claire murmured. Ready? She asked quietly. Jeffrey looked across the room at Jennifer, at Brian, at all the people who'd watched Jennifer treat him like he was insignificant, who'd probably gossiped about how the CEO's husband couldn't keep up with her success. Ready, Jeffrey said. The formal board meeting was scheduled to start in 30 minutes. But it wouldn't go the way Jennifer had planned. Not even close, because Jeffrey Graney was about to remind everyone in that room exactly who built Cloud Tech Solutions and exactly who had the power to tear it all down. The board meeting began at 7 sharp. Jennifer stood at the front of the conference room, adjacent to the ballroom, her presentation slides glowing behind her on the massive screen. She looked every inch the confident CEO, shoulders back, voice strong, commanding the room with practiced ease. Jeffrey sat in the back row, Claire beside him. The other board members, 5 in total, occupied the front seats. Brian Montgomery sat to Jennifer's right, his posture casual but his eyes alert. He'd grown comfortable in these spaces, Jeffrey noted. Comfortable with Jennifer's power, comfortable thinking he'd won. As you can see from Q4 projections, Jennifer was saying, clicking through slides that showed Cloud Tech's impressive growth trajectory, we're positioned for a breakthrough year. The enterprise clients we've secured in the past quarter alone represent a 42% revenue increase. Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. Jennifer smiled, feeding off the energy. And I want to thank our CFO, Brian Montgomery, for his invaluable contribution to these negotiations. Jennifer gestured toward Brian. His financial strategies have been instrumental. Brian nodded, accepting the praise with practiced humility that made Jeffrey's stomach turn. Those financial strategies included embezzling $400,000, but nobody in this room knew that. Not yet. Jennifer continued for another 20 minutes, outlining expansion plans, hiring projections, and potential acquisition targets. She was good at this, Jeffrey had to admit. She painted a vision that made everyone want to buy in, want to be part of CloudTech's future. Finally, she reached the last slide. Before we wrap up the formal portion, I want to address a personal matter. As many of you know, Jeffrey Graney and I are divorcing. The room went quiet. Jeffrey felt eyes shift toward him, curious and uncomfortable. This is obviously difficult, Jennifer continued, her voice taking on a softer, more vulnerable tone. But I want to assure everyone that this personal change won't affect CloudTech's operations. Jeffrey will be transitioning out of his advisory role and will be moving forward with a clean separation of personal and professional interests. She paused, and Jeffrey saw something flicker in her expression. Sadness, guilt, or just a well-practiced simulation of both. I'll always be grateful for Jeffrey's early contributions to CloudTech, Jennifer said. He was essential in those founding years, but companies evolve and so do people. I think we can all agree that CloudTech's future is bright, and that requires leadership that matches our ambitions. The subtext was clear. Jeffrey was the past. Jennifer was the future. Several board members nodded sympathetically. Jeffrey recognized the look. They'd bought Jennifer's narrative completely. The brilliant CEO who'd outgrown her husband. The woman who'd carried the company on her back while Jeffrey had simply written code. It was time to correct that story. Jeffrey stood up. The movement was sudden enough that conversation faltered. Jennifer's eyes snapped to him, surprised and annoyed. Jeffrey, she said, her voice carrying a warning, this isn't the appropriate time. Actually, Jennifer, it's the perfect time. Jeffrey's voice was calm, almost gentle. He looked around the room at the board members. At Brian Montgomery's suddenly tense expression, that Claire, who gave him a barely perceptible nod. I'd like to exercise my right as majority shareholder to call for an emergency vote. Jeffrey continued. The room went silent. Someone's pen dropped, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet. Jennifer's face went pale. What did you just say? My right as majority shareholder, Jeffrey repeated. He walked slowly toward the front of the room, his footsteps measured and deliberate. I own 57% of CloudTech Solutions. I have voting control, and I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current CEO. That's not possible. Jennifer's voice had lost its confident smoothness. I own 51%. We restructured 3 years ago. I signed documents, Jeffrey agreed, but not the ones you think I did. He nodded to Claire, who stood and began distributing folders to each board member. The folders were thick, professionally bound with the CloudTech logo on the front. What is this? One of the board members, Thomas Bradford, asked, opening his folder. Documentation, Jeffrey said simply. The first section contains the actual ownership structure of CloudTech Solutions. You'll see that I've been the majority shareholder all along. The restructuring Jennifer believes happened never actually went through. My attorney reviewed and modified the final documents before I signed them. Jennifer signed what she thought was her version. I signed the corrected version. Both sets went to the state, but mine were filed first and properly notarized. Jennifer's hands were shaking. Jeffrey noticed the tremor and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. You're lying, she whispered. This is some kind of fraud. Is it fraud to have your attorney review documents before you sign them? Claire interjected, her voice crisp and professional. It's called due diligence, something Jennifer apparently didn't do before assuming she'd successfully stolen majority control of her husband's company. Brian Montgomery stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Jennifer has been running this company for 3 years. Jeffrey has barely been involved. You can't just... Please see Section 2 of your folders, Jeffrey interrupted, his voice still infuriatingly calm. That's where things get interesting. Thomas Bradford was already flipping pages, his expression growing darker. These are expense reports, flagged expenses. This consulting contract with... He looked up sharply at Brian. With Montgomery Financial Consulting. $8,000 a month for 18 months. That's a legitimate business expense, Brian said. But his voice had lost its confidence. I provide financial advisory services. Do you? Jeffrey pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and an image appeared on the presentation screen behind Jennifer, replacing her carefully crafted slides. Because, according to state business records, Montgomery Financial Consulting was registered 3 days after you began work at CloudTech as CFO. It has no other clients. It provides no actual services. It exists solely as a vehicle for Jennifer to funnel company money to you. The room erupted. Board members were talking over each other, demanding explanations. Jennifer was saying something about misunderstandings and accounting errors, but her voice sounded hollow, desperate. Jeffrey pulled up another image. Bank statements, transfer records, emails, each one more damning than the last. Section 3 documents every financial decision Jennifer made without proper board approval over the past 3 years. Jeffrey continued. She's violated our corporate bylaws 47 times. She's made unauthorized expenditures totaling over $2 million. And she's been using company resources to pay her. He paused, letting the word hang. Boyfriend. This is a setup, Jennifer said, but her voice cracked. Jeffrey is trying to sabotage me because I asked for a divorce. This is revenge. No, Jeffrey said quietly. This is justice. There's a difference. He turned to address the board directly. I didn't want to do this publicly. I hoped we could resolve this quietly after the divorce. But Jennifer forced my hand. She included a non-compete clause in the divorce settlement. That would prevent me from working in my own industry for 5 years, not because it was necessary for any legitimate reason, but because she wanted to make sure I couldn't rebuild after she took everything I'd helped create. He pulled up one more document on the screen, an email from Jennifer to her divorce attorney. Make sure the non-compete is ironclad. I don't want Jeffrey able to work anywhere in cloud computing. He needs to understand he can't compete at my level. This is as much about sending a message as protecting cloud tech. The cruelty of the words hung in the air. Several board members looked away, uncomfortable. Thomas Bradford's expression had turned to disgust. You wanted to destroy me, Jeffrey said, looking directly at Jennifer. Not for any business reason, not to protect the company. Thought I would just accept whatever you decided to give me. Jennifer's face was a mask of shock and fury. You had no right to access my private communications. This is... I had every right, Claire interrupted, her voice cold and precise. As majority shareholder, Jeffrey has access to all company communications, including those sent from company email accounts, which you used for personal matters, repeatedly, including coordinating your affair with Mr. Montgomery. Brian had gone completely still, his face ashen. He looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. I move a vote, Jeffrey said formally. All those in favor of removing Jennifer Graney as CEO of Cloud Tech Solutions, effective immediately. For a long moment, nobody moved. The board members looked at each other, at the documentation in front of them, at Jennifer's stricken face. Then Thomas Bradford raised his hand. I vote yes. Another hand went up, then another. Within seconds, all 5 board members had voted to remove Jennifer. She stood there, frozen, as the reality crashed over her. Everything she'd built her identity around, the CEO title, the power, the respect, was being stripped away in front of everyone who mattered. This isn't over, she said, but her voice shook. I'll fight this. I'll sue. You'll do what exactly? Jeffrey asked. Sue me for exercising my legal rights as majority shareholder. Sue the board for voting to remove a CEO who violated corporate bylaws dozens of times. You're welcome to try, Jennifer. I have 3 years of documentation. I'll win. The silence that followed was absolute. Jeffrey could hear his own heartbeat, could feel every eye in the room fixed on the scene unfolding. Jennifer's chest was rising and falling rapidly, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. She looked at Brian, who wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked at the board members, who were carefully studying their folders. She looked finally at Jeffrey, and he saw the moment she truly understood what had happened. She'd underestimated him completely.